Hey there, Smoke Master D coming at you with a barbecue buyer's guide that's a little bit different from other barbecue buyer's guides I've done in the past. I've wanted to make this show particularly for a while as a guide mostly to beginners, but it could be useful for all people in barbecue, and that is how to pick between different kinds of barbecue cookers, right? And so I'm gonna break down 6 different aspects to think about, and then we're gonna look at those aspects with each different kind of cooker, all right? And the first aspect is heat and heat type. And there's 2 main heat categories for barbecue cooking, and those are direct and indirect. Now, direct means that you have the fire, and the radiant energy from the fire actually does a good portion of the cooking of the meat, right? Now, to think about radiant heat, think about the sun, right? You walk out into the sun and you feel the heat on your face. That's radiant energy and radiant heat. You don't feel it on the back of your head, but you do feel it on your face. So the thing about radiant heat is that it's directional, and it's also has to do with proximity. The closer you are to that source, the hotter it is, and the further away you are, the cooler it is. So those aspects come into play with barbecue cookers, and the radiant heat can cook one side more than the other. So especially on grills, you're gonna maybe flip the meat, and that is part of that aspect. Now, the opposite of direct heat is going to be indirect heat. And indirect heat is when something is blocking that radiant heat. All right, and it's usually a plate of some kind. So you have your fire and you have convection. And convection is when the heat of air is what is actually transferring the heat energy to the meat. And one very important aspect of this convection that sometimes gets overlooked is velocity, right? And you know this just from being out in the weather. So if it's 50 degrees outside and there's wind of 3 miles per hour, it probably feels like 50 degrees. But if it's 15 miles per hour of wind, it feels a lot colder to you. That's because that air is hitting your body with more velocity and rapidity, and it's stealing the heat away quicker. The same thing goes with cooking with convection. The heat and those air molecules, the faster that it's hitting your meat, the quicker it's getting that heat energy to it. So even though your thermometer reads a certain temperature in your cooker, the air velocity really does matter for the cooking. And we're going to take a look at air velocity in a few different kinds of smokers, right? And so that can play a big part of how the cooking occurs. So those are the main things to do with heat, and that wraps up our first aspect. All right, the second aspect that we're going to look at is time commitment. Now, a lot of times you'll hear something like set and forget. So what that means is that you can pretty much set up your cooker, and once you get it going the way that it needs to be going, it's going to run and stay at that temperature, whatever you've set it at, for as long as you need it to. Okay? And it's kind of a spectrum, right? So you have some smokers that are very close to set and forget, and you have some smokers that require a lot of tending. And you have to decide what you want to do and what you can handle, and with different cookers, it's going to be different. Do you really want to be involved in the cook? Being in every sort of aspect and a play-by-play kind of decision making, and thinking about the cook all the time. throughout the duration? Or are you somebody who has a lot of other things to tend to, and really what you want to do is just have it go? When it's done, pick it up, and then there it is. You have your wonderful meal, right? So that is something to consider. And as we discuss each of these kinds of smokers, we're going to talk about how much time and effort you're going to have to put into the cook while using them. Okay? All right, number 3 is best temperatures. And this relates directly to number 1, which is heat. But the engineering of the different kind of smokers makes it so that some of them operate more optimally at different temperatures. All right, and there's 3 basic zones of temperatures when using barbecue cooking. The lowest is called low and slow, and that's going to be usually somewhere between 200 and 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Above that, you have what's called hot and fast. The idea is that you're getting something very similar to low and slow, but you're cutting out some of the time by cooking faster. And that's between 250 and 300 roundabout. And then above that, somewhere around 350 to 500, you have grilling and searing. Okay? And there's no real set rules where one ends and the other begins, but they're generalities. All right? And with each type of cooking, we're going to look at what is the optimal sort of temperature range to cook at with this cooker. All right, and our 4th aspect is going to be efficiency. And this is also in 2 parts. So you're going to have fire efficiency and your heat efficiency. We'll talk about heat efficiency first. So heat efficiency is the amount of heat that is produced that actually goes into cooking your food. So, some of it's going to be lost and some of it's going to be kept. So, however much heat energy produced by that combustion that actually goes into cooking your food, that is going to be heat efficiency. Now, fire efficiency is related to heat efficiency, but it is different. So the idea behind fire efficiency is that fires that are super efficient produce not a whole lot of smoke. Fires that are very inefficient produce loads of smoke, right? So it's sort of a continuum. And the best smoking for barbecue happens near complete combustion, but in the spectrum just before it, right? So, if you have complete combustion, there's only usually, water vapor and carbon dioxide. That's what comes out of the fire. That's what you have when you burn stuff like propane. But when you're using wood and charcoal, if you're super efficient, you're not going to get a lot of smoke. But if you're a little bit inefficient in your fire, you are going to get smoke. And whatever range of smoke you want is kind of what you're going to be aiming at, right? And, if you have a super inefficient fire, you get this black, yucky smoke. So there's different compounds that are produced with different smoke ranges of efficiency. And it's very important to think about that aspect when you're looking at a cooker. So we're going to break that down for these cookers as well. And it's a general range kind of thing. And your cooker can produce more than one kind of smoke, right? But we're going to look at that aspect as well. All right, the 5th aspect that we're going to look at is size and capacity. And I'm going to mention this more in the pros and the cons than for each one specifically. But size and capacity is sort of dependent on a few things, right? And when we talk about capacity, we're talking about how much meat you can put it inside the smoker. And different smoker types lend themselves to different sizes and capacities. For one example, drum smokers are usually only made as large as 55 gallons in size. Now they could make them larger than that, But the thing about it is that those drums are made and manufactured for different purposes and then repurposed a lot of times for smokers. So that could just be one of the economic kind of things. The other thing is vertical versus horizontal. Now, you can get a whole lot more capacity vertically, but a lot of people want something that's horizontal. For whatever reason, maybe it looks like a grill more to them. They can, go into it. And we'll discuss that aspect for each of these smokers as well as we may, with the pros and the cons. All right, the sixth and last aspect that we want to look at is price. Now, I put price last just because I think that coming at it from all those different aspects first is maybe your best way to find what kind of smoker is right for you, right? And the one thing about price is that for each of these smokers, there's a range, okay? There's ones that are going to be less expensive and there's ones that are going to be more expensive. Now, with each different kind of smoker or barbecue pit, there are different factors at play for what the prices will be. One of those things is, was it made in a foreign country for cheaper, mass produced, or was it built in the United States by skilled craftsmen? Okay, so locally made kind of barbecue smokers, and the prices will be affected because of that. The build quality, is it put together well? How is it put together? Is it bolted together, screwed together, welded together? So all of those things affect the price of these smokers. And like I said, there's usually a price range for any kind, and we're going to look at that too. All right. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is that there are a few smoker types that are maybe best for beginners, and those kinds are the ones that kind of take care of the whole heat and cooking element and allow you to focus on the elements of barbecue that are, the actual cooking the meat part. And I started off on a pellet grill. There's the Pellet Smoker is also a really good one to start off with. So that could be another aspect in itself for you to consider when picking out a kind of smoker that you want to do. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the pros and cons. Kinds of barbecue pits. So right before we get going, two things that I want to mention. And the first one is that I'm going to be dealing in generalities here. There are exceptions to some of these rules, and I'm going to point out some of those as we go along. The other thing I wanted to say is that my regular show, Barbecue Buyer's Guide, goes into specific barbecue pits. And I'm going to have listed links to some playlists for each of these kinds in the description. So if you want to check those out and dive into different makes and models of any of these kinds of pits, please look there. Electric smokers. All right, and this one's actually called an electric smoker, though there's a few more that work off of electricity. And its heat type is indirect, and we see that just a line there for the heat diffuser plate. It's a little more complicated than that in real life, but you see under that you have the water bowl and the wood chips, and most importantly, the heating element. Now, this thing is just like your oven inside your house, except that it is outside and has ventilation for outside and has wood chips that smolder. So part of the design is some sort of wood in there that's going to smolder and create smoke. Time commitment is low to mid, so you do have to go back and add the chips. Otherwise, it's just a big oven, right? And the best temperatures are low and slow. Now, this is one of those generalities. Most of them can't reach temperatures a whole lot higher than 300. which can become a real problem for doing something like chicken where you want to crisp up the skin. So, that is one thing to take into account. This thing has the lowest range, but that low is actually a pro in some instances. So these things are really good for cold smoking, if you get the attachment for it, or maybe just in general. They work really well as a warming oven. If you have another barbecue smoker and you just want to rest your meat in at a food safe temperature for however long, and resting is also a way of getting your meat to tender up a little bit more over a long period of time. So that is a consideration. Capacity, finishing up with the pros, the vertical design can lead to greater capacity. Unfortunately, a lot of these units are a little on the smaller side. So, especially for longer cuts like ribs and brisket, look into what the width is of these smokers, just so that you know that you can get the meats in there that you want. Yup, so efficiency is higher anyway. There's usually some insulation, either it's a double wall around these things, so and the heating element itself is pretty efficient. The chips, for fire efficiency, hopefully they've got it set up right so that they're going to smolder correctly and give you some good smoke. And that's it for the electric smoker. Now, pellet smokers are also run off of electricity. They're also an indirect style. Now, the one thing about this is that there are some that have some kind of access to the fire pot, so that you do have direct heat. That Pit Boss classic right there is one example. You have the sliding plate, and all of a sudden the fire is coming right up there. All right, really quickly, this thing works with the pellets in that hopper. They feed down where the auger at different times is going to turn on and push those pellets towards the fire pot. The ignition rod usually only has to go and work at the beginning to light that fire, but there's a fan that blows air down that shaft, which is right around the auger, but the air reaches the fire pot, stoking the fire, and the pellets are fed to the fire, and that is it. And then there's a pan or baffle above, keeping the direct heat, and the smoke goes up and the heat goes up to the food above. And that's how a pellet smoker works. Time commitment on these things is low, and that's one of their best selling points, is that you can pretty much set the temperature and walk away, and trust hopefully that it's going to stay at that temperature and cook your food the way you want it to. Now, the best temperatures for these things are low and slow, hot and fast. So, as the name implies, these things will also grill. They get up to grilling temperatures. The one issue that they have is with searing, and it's like their holy grail. These pellet grills have been looking to get that great sear for a long time. A lot of them have a bunch of different ways they do it. We saw the sliding plate just a second ago, which is Pit Boss's solution, but there are many more solutions. So if you're looking into these, that's one thing that you'll want to look at. If you want to get that sear on this, you can always get your cast iron skillet, put it on some other burner, and do your searing there. But if you do want to actually sear on a pellet grill, each different maker may have a different way of doing it. Now, the efficiency is fairly high in certain regards. So, these pellets, they burn pretty well. A lot of the heat stays in. You're going to lose heat off of it. So maybe I could have put mid there instead of high for fuel efficiency. And some of them do have more insulation than others. Now, the fire efficiency is high, and that is where things become problematic. And we're going to jump over to cons. There's a danger of less smoke flavor. So As we learned before, high efficiency means less smoke. Now, they will generally have a smoke setting, and it's usually at a lower temperature, but they have to program these things to create less efficiency in the way that they're burning, and that will create more smoke. Is it enough to make the smoke as much smoke as you want? That's the question. And this is another thing that engineers have been working on for a long time, with varying levels of success as well. So the pros, it's going to create great tasting food. You're going to have a lot of control over that cooking environment. The cons, danger of less smoke flavor. And a lot of times people like it. People like the smoke flavor the way it is, even if it is a little bit lighter than some of the other forms. So for a lot of the crowd you're cooking for, it's going to be just great. But for some palates, it's going to be too light. The other thing is tech issues. The pellet smoker is the most complicated smoker on this list. It has more moving parts than any other smoker. Your ignition rod can go out, your auger can jam, right? You can have bridging in the hopper, and that means the pellets have come together in such a way that they don't go down, and that's an issue sometimes. So circuits can short out. It is the most complicated smoker machine, and eventually something's going to happen. It's going to break down at some point. For a lot of people, that's in the future. They don't care, right? They'll fix it. They'll get another one, whatever it is. But maybe for you, you want something simpler. All right, so it is a con. The searing issues we talked about. They have ways around it, but it is something. A lot of variety in these smokers, a lot of difference, a lot of exceptions to rules, but that is a general overview of what you have for pellet smokers. All right, and now the electric gravity smoker. Okay, so this is also an indirect heat type. And how these work is that, that charcoal chute, it has charcoal, and the gravity part is it goes down to a fire that's actually underneath. There's a little grate, and the fire and the ashes falls through that grate. There's a fan, that's blowing, and there's a temperature probe inside. So it's kind of trying to hit the temperature with how much air it puts into that fire from the charcoal coming down. And the heat goes from the ash pan area into the main chamber, and that is how an electric gravity smoker works. The time commitment is low to mid, depending whether you're adding chunks, and you can add chunks in here either in the chute or in the ash pan. But that's one thing that you want to be careful about is read what manufacturers say to do. Look at what other people are doing before you start adding chunks in different places. The thing about wood chunks is they burn hotter than charcoal, so it can create problems. But people do use wood chunks to create more smoke, and if you are adding them to the ash pan, that could take more time to do that. The best temperatures on this thing really does have a lot of potential to get really hot. Now, does this one hit all temperatures the best? I think there's a good case for it. The other thing that I didn't mention is that you can crank up the temperature on these things to sear, and it sears naturally, I believe, better than a pellet smoker. I think the way that the charcoal and the fan work, you can just get a high temperature better right there near the firebox side of this thing to get the sear that you want better naturally than a lot of pellet smokers. Now, there are some exceptions, but just naturally from what I've seen with these, they sear. So you have hot and fast as well, and low and slow. The efficiency though is mid, just like I was gonna say for pellet. Fire efficiency is also mid. You get a lot of charcoal smoke flavor. And if you put those wood chunks in, you get a lot of good smoke flavor for that as well. Electric gravity may be the best overall, all around smoker, perhaps. So it's gonna make you great tasting food. You're gonna have great smoke flavor. There is a possibility of technical issues, but one thing that sets it apart from the pellet grill is that the gravity that brings the charcoal down kind of cuts out one thing. It doesn't have an auger, so there's no auger system. It has a fan, just like your pellet grill, and it has a thermometer that helps it read the temperature. That's it. So it is less complicated than the pellet grill, but there are technical things, and they can fail. So it's an interesting innovation, and I think that we're going to see a lot more of the electric gravity smoker in the future. I think more people will build them, and I think that there is even more room for improvement to make this a better system. Now for charcoal. All right, and the first one we have here is the Pellet Smoker. So it is an indirect form of cooking. If you remove the water pan, which is generally the only thing between the charcoal basket and the grates, then you can have direct heat. And really, it kind of makes it a drum smoker. So it's not hard to switch that out if that's what you want. But it is generally good for low and slow and hot and fast, depending on how you set up the dampers. You're probably not going to do a whole lot of grilling on these things. It's probably not going to get that high too easily. Now, that's not impossible, but it's not really made for that. Of course, you take that water bowl out, you never know. The efficiency for the fuel is about mid. It's these things, they don't put a lot of insulation on them, so there's going to be some heat bleeding out that way. But the fire is also going to be mid, which is where you kind of want it. So a lot of people make some really good food on these bullet smokers. Really good smoke flavor. Pros, they're relatively easy to use. They're relatively cheap. So for price, they give you great flavor. There are capacity limitations, right? You have however many grates. The grates are however much diameter. There's a possibility of low airspeed, but with that heat bleeding, you're going to have a little bit more airflow to get those temperatures. The crazy thing in barbecue is that efficiency is not always the best thing. So having less efficiency can be good. So a little bit lower airspeed, perhaps, depending on how you set things up. It's possible that hot and fast could give you better smoke. So if you have one of these things, play around with it. See where you land on that. All right, and now the drum smoker, very similar to the bullet smoker, except for that water pan, right? The other thing is that, they are generally, historically built out of repurposed drums, steel drums. And that made them relatively cheap. And, if you knew a little bit about working a drill and metal, you could make one for yourself. And there were kits out there. So they became really popular as a cheap form of making a smoker. But not having that water plate in there makes them a direct smoking unit. But it's not going to sear the underside of what you're cooking quite as much as you'd think. That space, of course, makes it so that the radiant energy is lessened. And the other thing, when you hang it, when the tip of your meat is there, the surface area actually being hit by the radiant energy directly on is pretty small. And then,
A lot of them are trying to create this vortex of air to sort of swish around and even out the heat that way too. So a lot of people really love drum smokers. And earlier I was cooking on one while I was talking to you. The other thing I wanted to mention was that drum smokers are round, but grill smokers are square. That's basically the only difference. The chud box is one that comes to mind, and in some areas of the United States, grills of this sort are very popular. These are what are pig cookers, and you can, with the square design, the capacity limitations are somewhat overcome. So the drum has capacity limitations, jumping over to cons, but the square cookers, you can build that cube shape as large as you need. Time commitment is also low. You set it just like the bullet smoker, and it'll go. It'll go for you. Jumping back over to grill smokers, though, for time commitment, if you are making your own coals by burning wood down into coals to shovel in, that is actually a lot of work and time commitment. But in general, the drum smokers, their time commitment is low. Best temperature is usually hot and fast, and it just has to do with the airflow. They cook best hot and fast. You can achieve low and slow, but again, it's going to slow down that airflow, and in general, isn't really what you want for the best tasting food. You can try to, but a lot of people, if you get one of these, try it both ways and see which you like better. A lot of people like to do hot and fast on these drum smokers, and it saves time. The cook's shorter, but the efficiency mid. So good smoke flavor, heat bleed is all right. Now the pros, one of the other things that people love about these, and is really a great thing in general for direct heat cookers, is the juice vaporization, right? The juice, the grease, it's going to vaporize in the fire and make a different flavor of smoke, a different flavor profile. People love with these drum smokers. Also, the hanging really increases the capacity, right? Anytime that you can make things vertical, your capacity is going to increase almost tenfold. If you can hang ribs, a lot of people use these things almost exclusively for ribs. You can feed 50 people out of one drum smoker with ribs. It's crazy. The cons, fires can sometimes burn unevenly in these things, and it depends on the design. That's something that's happened to me in my pit barrel cooker occasionally. It's something you have to watch, and it's something you can mess around with a little bit and try to fix. Also, if you're not into hanging and if you're just using the rack, there are capacity limitations that you may find. But the hanging is a really great way to get around that. All right, and now we've got the Kettle Grill. These are really popular with a lot of people, and they have been popular for a long time. I believe they were made first in the 1950s, but they are a direct style of grilling with indirect as possible. Now, a lot of times with indirect, it's kind of just like on the side. How indirect is it? There are upgrades like the slow and sear. Weber has its own sort of charcoal holder baskets to help create indirect cooking. And the idea is, that you bank or you have in a basket the charcoal to one side and then the meat to the other side of the smoker, and kind of have a separation or an offset kind of situation there inside the grill. And real quickly, just how it works, it's very simple, very similar to others like the drum smoker, the bullet smoker. Air intake on the bottom, charcoal fire on a small grate above there, a grate above that for food, and an exhaust damper above that. So it's a vertical system, unless make the bank to the side kind of thing, but very simplistic in its engineering. Now, time commitment is low to mid. Now, low, yeah, if you could set up those dampers and just let it go. Some people, though, they just take off the lid, have the charcoal in there blazing. They're cooking on top of the surface, and it's just, you got to be there flipping the burgers, uh, having your attention completely there on the grill. And that would be sort of the mid area. Best temperatures, of course, it's going to grill really well. It is a grill, get that direct heat. It's going to do hot and fast, and low and slow is possible. So you cover pretty much all of your bases here. Efficiency, mid and mid. It's going to get good smoke. Now, you're not going to want to use really large wood chunks. In fact, chips might be better for making that smoke. And it can be difficult to get the chips in there if you don't have a grate with a hinge that opens up. So that's one thing to consider. But overall, it's going to give you some good flavor, good smoke, and it's going to get hot. It's a direct grill, and part of that is just like the space in there. There's not a whole lot of space, and there's a lot of fire, so the thing can get hot. The pros, they're fairly affordable compared to other grills and smokers. And in fact, they're mass produced. You can get cheap ones for very little money, $100 less. And they're good all around for all different kinds of cooking. But the cons, there's a small capacity issue. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some truly huge kettle grills made. They're rare, and you could order one, but for the most part, they are a certain size. I believe 22 inches is standard. And if you want to cook more than one brisket, it's just a no-go. And when you're smoking, you're and banking the coals to one side, and you have to have space for your other meat to be on the other side, the two-zone system, it's going to cut down the capacity even further. So that is really the main thing that will hold the kettle grill back. A lot of people love them, a lot of people have them, but if capacity is what you're looking for, not really here on the kettle grill. All right, and now we've got the Kamado Grill. Now, these things really spiked in popularity in the 2010s. Everyone wanted them. They were everywhere. And they're still going strong. They're still really popular. But they are direct and indirect. You can set them up on the inside, usually in different ways, configure them to make different sorts of, grilling choices and smoking choices. And you see in this diagram, you have that heat diffuser there, not always included. So, it could be that the unit you buy is more direct heat, but usually you can buy some sort of diffuser or something there to make it so that you do have an indirect style. It's called a grill for a reason, right? Because that direct heat type is there for you if and when you want it. The time commitment is generally low. You set those dampers and lock in that temperature, and it's going to hold temperatures like a champ, right? And part of the reason is that ceramic shell. Ceramic is going to hold in the heat, and it's going to keep that thing hot. The one thing about these Kamado grills is not much heat bleed, okay? And that is good and bad, as we've talked about before. Your best temperatures are going to be grilling. Actually, these things for high temperature stuff, they're probably the best. That's why people use these as pizza ovens, right? You can go up to 500, maybe even higher, and make a pizza, and it's going to do really well with it. Now, hot and fast is going to be good too for smoking, but when you get down to low and slow, The fact that it doesn't have very good heat bleed means that you're going to be trying to get down there and you're going to be cutting off so much oxygen flow that the air is going to be moving very slow. And when you have very slow air, it affects it. It just does. And the smoke that you're creating in general is not the best quality smoke either. And remember that spectrum of where you want the fire efficiency. It's not best for that. It doesn't create the best fire efficiency in general. Now, there is one notable exception from Kamado Joe, their third series, where they have an innovation that helps with that, the slow roller. And if you want to check out my video on that, please do. But in general, they have issues with airflow and velocity in these things for low and slow. Okay. Now, efficiency is high, high all the way around. And, that can be great. It's really great if you want to make pizza. So the pros: easily reaches high temperatures, lots of accessories, customizations, can get a bunch of things to do different things in them. It's a lot of fun. The cons, like we said, the low and slow, capacity as well, right? Cost too in general, but you build this shell, right, and it can only be so large and fit in on a roller. You could build one in the ground. In fact, people did. These things, they come from Southeast Asia, Eastern Asia, and originally these things were built into the ground as big ceramic enclosures, pots. They could be huge, but what we have here and what's sold here are these units that aren't in general that large. So there's a capacity issue there, wherein if you really wanted to do a lot of meat, you might have to get more than one. The other thing is there's not really a hanging sort of option for these things. They don't hang. It's just grates. So they have some of the least capacity for smokers of relative similar size. So you do have to take the good with the bad. Charcoal cabinet smokers. All right, so the one episode that I did on these was the reverse flow. So if you don't have the reverse flow part, and I'm not going to go into everything for the reverse flow, it would be a lot like the bullet smoker, especially with that water pan. The one thing about reverse flow is that it allows more even heating up there. So go check out that episode, but it is generally an indirect heat type. You can take out the plate sometimes and do some direct heat cooking. So that it is possible, but in general, they're for indirect cooking. Time commitment's going to be low, possible refueling, but in general, these things usually go a really long time on one basket of charcoal. Best temperatures, smoking, hot and fast. As far as grilling goes, they can get up to grilling temperatures, more the lower side of grilling, not the hottest side. I just looked at one website and they said the max temp that they recommended using it for was 425, which is definitely in grilling range, but it's not really made for that, although it can get to those higher temperatures, especially with the insulation and especially with the use of a draft fan, right? So those fans blow and are trying to reach a temperature, so they're going to increase the oxygen to the charcoal basket to make it to the temperature that you want. The fuel efficiency is going to be high, and the fire efficiency is going to be mid to higher. It's a strange thing. I think that one of the reasons it doesn't have quite the heat efficiency of Kamado ceramic grills, so that's a help. And I think that the bigger size of everything in general helps the heat to spread out a bit more. So low and slow works a bit better on these charcoal cabinets maybe than the Kamado cookers. All right. But smoke quality is something that you're gonna want to look at on these things as well. But one of the best pros is that it's gonna have a high capacity. The cabinet style just makes for better capacity. Having a number of racks, you can really make the vertical space work for you and fit a lot in there. The cons, we talked about those. So, possibly air movement and refueling. But in general, these cabinet smokers do pretty well overall. Now, the regular gravity feed smoker. So this thing is a little bit different from the electric one. The main difference is that a simple ball valve, usually it's a ball valve, controls the oxygen instead of like a fan in the electric style. And you can add electricity to these things and get a blower, and then they'll work very similar to the electric gravity feed smokers that I showed you before. The biggest difference is that when Masterbuilt and Char Griller made the two units that make up the entirety of the electric gravity feed smoker market, it's just two players in it. They wanted to make something that also looked like a grill, looked like the propane grills that people buy at the store, and would have that high heat grilling. So what that did was it really cut down on capacity. And these regular gravity feed smokers are not for grilling. They're smokers. They're, so an element of versatility, I suppose, is lost, but the compensation is capacity. And these things can turn out a lot of meat. But the heat type is indirect. You can take the plate off or whatever and try to cook more direct. But even then, the heating is from the side. In fact, some people call these things offset smokers just because the fire is offset. And technically that could be true. But the best temperatures, low and slow, or hot and fast. All right, and just like the cabinet smokers, though, you can bump these up to temperatures that are going to be grilling. The other thing is that diffuser plate, you might even try to sear on it if you keep it clean enough. So I'm just saying, though, that mostly people use these for low and slow and hot and fast. But grilling is possible. And the efficiency, they have insulation. So these things will have insulation to keep the heat in. But it's usually not enough to make it so that you're cutting down the airflow too much, right? And the great thing about charcoal is that you can have the smoke of charcoal without having dirtier smoke. A lot of the dirtiness is burned off in the process of making charcoal. A lot of great flavor from charcoal on these things. You can also use the wood chunks, just like before. In all of these things that use charcoal, the percentage of wood chunk to charcoal needs to be low. 10% is about the tops you want to do. Too much wood and things will go bad in these charcoal smokers. They're just not. That's not what they are. Now, the pros: high capacity, continual new fuel means more new smoke, right? If you burn charcoal, it grays up, and grays over, I should say, and the smokiness is lost. But you're always getting new charcoal here and new smoke. How about that? Gravity makes that possible. The cons: possible heat distribution. You need the plate to be right. The heat also, top to bottom, is also going to be different. You're just going to have to take that into account generally. I do think I can't remember if there is a reverse flow model of these. So check for that. That might have better heat distribution. But gravity feed overall, a lot of people like it. A lot of people like it a lot. And lastly, we are on to live fire. When I say live fire, I mean like you're burning a fire with wood pieces, right? They're just pieces that are making a fire. Right, now we have here the Santa Maria Grill. Also, the Gaucho Grill is a close cousin. I have an episode on Gaucho Grills. So if you're checking out my episodes, do look at that too. The heat type is direct. Okay, so that fire on the bottom, you're going to have fire bricks down there. Time commitment high. You've got to manage that fire. It's if you just leave it, it's gonna burn out. You have to replenish it. You have to make sure that it's doing what you want it to do. This live fire in general is not set and forget. Best temperatures, you lower that grate down. This thing works pretty well at all temperatures, just because when you raise and lower the grate, it changes the temperature, right? Not a whole lot of people do really low and slow, just because, one, these things are the least efficient smoker here. This Santa Maria Grill, like I say, over here is the lowest, so it's just a lot of fuel. And when you could cook hotter and faster, most people do, right? You just lower it down a little bit. You're gonna finish a little bit sooner, with it being a little bit hotter, and still get something that is very close. The other thing is, with that radiant heat, it's just easier a lot of times to do it hot and fast on these things. All right. So the efficiency is going to be lowest for fuel. The fire, you build the fire. So are you making a really smoky fire? Are you making a really hot and less smoke sort of fire, more efficient fire? So how you build your fire changes it. And when you get into the Gaucho grills, you're usually cooking over coals. Coals are very efficient, and in general, they don't smoke very much. You can get coals that do, when you tamp down the heat on them, spread them out a little bit more. But, the possibility of the fire efficiency is just whatever you want it, really. Now let's hit the pros and cons again. Pros: juice vaporization, like with all direct style ones. Also flare-ups. Now they've made grates that have these V's that capture the juices and make it so that there are less flare-ups. Temp control, really easy with raising and lowering it. Cons: a lot of time commitment. And the smoke being unconcentrated. A lot of people like this because the Santa Maria Grill, it's kind of closest, most primitive to what our ancestors did for barbecue, right? Over an open fire, cooking over an open fire, like a camp style cooking. It really brings it back to this. So there's a real primitive element to Santa Maria grills that a lot of people like. I like it. And lastly, for the smoke being unconcentrated, there's two things for that. The first is that a lot of the cooks you do on the Santa Maria Grill are going to be shorter, so not as much time for smoke to get on the meat. And the other thing is that there's nothing enclosing it, and it's just the open air there, so it doesn't get concentrated in the same way as an enclosed kind of smoking environment. But most people, still like the grill flavor, char flavor that you get on there, and there is smoke flavor, and there's the juice vaporization. So, take it as you will. And lastly, we have the offset smoker. They have become very popular. Maybe not the most popular, but very popular nonetheless. The heat type is indirect. That's the whole point of the offset part of it. Now, you can do direct heat in the firebox, you know, even in this picture from Lifetime Smokers. And they may have made the first offset smoker, at least commercially perhaps. And you can just lift that lid on the firebox and do direct heat cooking. But they're known for being indirect. Time commitment is high. You know, you have to tend the fire again. The fire is in that firebox. You've got to make it do what you want to do, and you've got to be there to make it do it. You know, 30, 45 minutes is the most time you're going to get between putting on those sticks and messing around with it. Now, the best temperatures on these things, low and slow. They do it really well, hot and fast. And if you want to grill, you're going to do it in the firebox generally. That's how it is. Some people grill right next to the firebox in the main chamber. Some people put charcoal in the main chamber and cook and grill in the main chamber itself. That really changes what it is and just makes it into a charcoal grill. But you can do it. The efficiency, you know, is going to be low. A lot of that heat is going to come right up out of the top of that firebox. And that's why you see the pot warmer there on the Lifetime. That's why that's even there, because of that inefficiency of cooking what's in the main chamber. But like we said before, lower efficiency isn't always bad in barbecue, and the fire efficiency is what you make of it, how you make your fire. So, you know, the thing about offset smokers is they have a lot of potential to make the best barbecue that you've ever made. On the other hand, they have a lot of potential to make the worst barbecue you've ever made. So coming over here to the cons, besides the time commitment thing, there's a learning curve. Learning how to tend to fire takes a little bit of time, and you can make mistakes, and those mistakes can ruin your meal. You know, it's something that you have to know going in, that you're going to have to put in the time to learn the craft of making that fire work for you. You know, but if you go into it with that mindset, you can make some of the best food that you've ever had. The pros is that for air velocity, hands down, offset smokers are pretty much the best. You know, maybe you could see that in a different kind of smoker, but they're known for it. And what that does is, especially when you have a fat cap, it renders that fat really well and creates a bark. They sometimes call it sugar cookie kind of bark that you don't generally get in a lot of other kind of smokers. It also gives you a real full smoke flavor just from having the full fire there, right? When you have a fire, like a real live fire, different parts of the fire are making smoke at different efficiencies. And when you have that roundness of smoke flavor, it's generally just better, tastes better. It can, you know, it's subjective to different people, but a lot of people like that. A lot of people think the offset is the best for making the best barbecue. Now, is that technically true all the way around? Maybe not. And you have to decide. And you know, there's nothing that says you can't do all of them. You can't have one of each of these smokers and see what you like best. But the offset, for a lot of people, is worth the time and effort. And now we have price revisited. All right, so this is a chart, one of two, and I wanted to show you a little bit about comparing price ranges of these grills and smokers. You know, the first 4 or 5 here, the Kettle Grill, the Pellet Smoker, the electric, the pellet, and the drum smoker. And you could probably throw the Gravity electric in there as well. They're all affordable and really a good place to start if you're just getting into barbecue. So that Kettle Grill is going to be the lowest average price. So the first 10 average, I used Google, I went to shopping, I typed in the name of the smoker, and then I averaged the prices of the first 10 that came up. All right. And then to date show average. So I just took the prices of all of the smokers or grills in that category that I'd put in the show so far. And this is the average that came out with that. And, depending on what shows I did, the prices and averages for those are going to change a little bit. I put this in order of least to greatest from the first 10 average, I believe. And then, so you see it's going up incrementally that way. The Kamado, Santa Maria, the offset cabinet, is the charcoal cabinet, and the gravity smoker regular are going to be on the more expensive side. But the other thing that you should know is that there is a range, right? The range of, and the next slide is going to show a little bit more of that range. So what I did on this slide is I to find that range using Google Shopping, I took the lowest and the highest of what was there, and you can see the actual range. I kept the to date show average in there as well, just sort of as like a middle ground between the two, so you can see just where the average kind of falls. And you see that Bullet is the cheapest here instead of the Kettle. So 65 to 600 for the Bullet. I think I found a Kettle Grill that was all the way down $18. I think that was Groupon, all the way up to $2,472. There's this Ranch Kettle that's that expensive. The Electric 88 to 5,500. The Drum 126 to 2,500. Kamado 205 to 7,000. The Pellet 200 to 3,200. The Offset, now the Offset has trailers that they have offsets on, so that 12,000 up there is a trailer. The other thing to know is that this is just showing models that are sold commercially through Google, right? There are makers out there who do not sell like that, who are smaller, that may have different kind of deals, and different sorts of prices too. So this isn't a perfect data set, but it's just sort of to show you what kind of is the range out there to help you make your decision. The charcoal cabinet next, the Santa Maria. You see that 60,000 up there? So this chart would be way distorted if I'd actually put that 60,000 up there. The Santa Maria, when you get them in stainless steel, they're super expensive. So if you get a completely stainless steel Santa Maria grill, it's just astronomical, which is why I just threw that 60 up there as text. Santa Maria style smokers. Now I do have a Gabby's grill insert for a regular Weber kettle that makes it so that I have a Santa Maria that's fairly affordable. The gravity, I didn't separate it out between electric gravity and the regular gravity. So if you're getting electric gravity, it's going to be somewhere between sort of $500 to $1,000. So I put the electric gravity smoker down there at the bottom. The regular gravity ones are going to be more expensive. So I hope these two charts help you sort of get an idea of what you might expect to pay for any of these kinds of smokers or grills. And now my thoughts. I think that all of these choices could be the right choice. There aren't any kinds of grills or smokers that I would say, hey, never buy that one. There may be some models that I would say that of, but kinds, no. Except for maybe propane. And you can make propane work. You can add chips to propane too. And make, there are propane smokers out there. I'm just sort of adverse to propane just because there's no flavor in propane, and maybe it's a bad association. Maybe I should give them more credit for the ones that have, chip trays or you can burn chunks on. Maybe I should be a bit more gracious to propane smokers, but right now I'm not. And the last thing, um, you know, any one of these could be the one that's right for you, just depending on those six aspects, what you want in a smoker. So go through all six of those and think about them. Think about which one fits you the best. And maybe it's not just one, maybe it's a few. I have four grills and smokers, and they cover all my needs. So good luck. So those are my thoughts. If you have some thoughts on what's the best kind of smoker, please leave it down in the comments. Please also be civil. And that's it for our show. I hope that you found it helpful in choosing which kind of smoker you want to get. And when you do find that smoker and you buy it, drop me a comment down below and tell me what you got. And as always, you know what? Go get your smoke on, y'all.